spoken recently. So, just bear with me. But we have a beautiful show today. We have some beautiful people. We have Miss Chavez and my brother Jonathan. We're going to talk about environmental health. And of course, we have my esteemed colleague, Dr. Murray, and the man behind the scenes, Big Dre. Before we start, I want to give a special shout out to Black women, and specifically Black women in the WNBA. They were the ones that helped lead the protests, and a lot of protests, and often forgotten about in history. But for the women in the WNBA who led that protest against that crooked officer getting arrested, these sisters aren't millionaires. These sisters basically make under six figures, have jobs like us. So they literally put their livelihood and feeding their families on the line. I just want to acknowledge them, But how's everybody doing today? Doc Murray, you good?
I'm good, better than usual.
So am I, man. Like I said, I know you all saw the smoke. Hey, man, it's real. I quit smoking. Second update, I got vaccinated. I'm not telling anybody else to go do it. You all know I was very, very, very apprehensive about it. I didn't even get chicken pox shots when I was little. But I went ahead and got the Johnson & Johnson. I was under the weather for a little while in terms of being weak, short of breath, fever and chills, but it was nothing I couldn't deal with. I feel better. I won't get a booster shot, so to each his own. But let's start with the show. So,
Mr. Murray, let me just say that you got all your childhood shots, and you maligned my mother skills when you say you didn't get vaccinated. You got all your childhood vaccinations.
Man,
I just want to make that clear.
Up until I stopped at the age of 5 or 6. It was hard to hold me down. You remember when I came out, me and the doctor got into it for smacking me. Oh, we got our new guest on here. So let's start off with the guest. So ladies first, Miss Chavez, introduce yourself.
Hi. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm Yesenia Chavez, born and raised on the southeast side of Chicago in the 10th Ward, descendant, first generation immigrant of Mexican immigrants from Jalisco and Durango. My whole entire family is rooted in the 10th Ward in Chicago here, and I'm a full-time student at City Colleges studying biology to go into medicine, which is pretty exciting. Currently doing some research right now, trying to connect the dots between how environmental factors can trigger or exacerbate the toxic stress response in high school students. So that should be a pretty fun project to get my hands on this semester. And I also am a community organizer with United Neighbors of the 10th Ward, the Southeast Side Coalition to Ban Pet Coke, and the Southeast Environmental Task Force.
Excellent, excellent. Let's talk offline about medical school. I'm affiliated with AHEC and Project Brotherhood. Does a lot of things, and we could definitely link you up with some other groups. Miss Brianna, introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks for inviting me into this space. My name is Brianna. I use they, them pronouns. I got involved with the Stop General Iron campaign from also United Neighbors of the 10th Ward. I got invited in there from an event that I later found out that Yesenia ended up planning. So that kind of worked out. So I got plugged in. I'd been working with them for the last, I think, 6 months prior to when we had our last escalation, the hunger strike. I'm not a Chicago native. I'm from Ohio originally. I just got lucky to land in a community that welcomed me in.
What part of Ohio?
She's freezing up a little bit, so she'll come back on in a few minutes. Southside internet.
She must be a Buckeyes fan. I'm straight Illinois and Michigan, but we won't hold that against her. My man Jonathan, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Sure. My name is Jonathan Contreras. I was born in the South Side, grew up mostly in Oak Park. My family moved back to the South Side, to the East Side. So very familiar with the neighborhood. They've been there for about 10 years. I have a lot of family over there. I have a tia, an aunt, an uncle who's a firefighter. Very familiar with the neighborhood. Very shocked to hear about what's going on with General Iron moving into the neighborhood. A little bit more about myself. Background is undergrad in economics from U of I. I had a privilege to go and get my master's degree in public health and business at UIC. And I've had different positions in either government, nonprofit, or academic institutions. And I am an avid gardener. I participate in a local urban farm, urban garden that we have, a community garden that I have over here in Humboldt Park. And very much something that I hold close to my heart, and I try to advocate wherever possible to continue to have green space in the city. So I'm very happy to be here. I also wanted to point out this shirt that that I've had for about 5 years now. I hope, Dr. Murray, you still have yours. It's very relevant to what we've been talking about. In the back, it has the hashtag of water is life and the Dakota pipeline. This was something that Jim Boyd helped create the shirt a couple of years back, and it's something I was, what am I going to wear for this podcast, right? And I found it. I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what we need to post.
That's good. That's good. We need to talk too, man. I'm starting to grow peppers and onions and stuff like that. I'm trying to get into vertical garden, but we'll talk offline. So, Dr. Murray, tell us what environmental health is. Well, before you say this, let me say this to everybody. We often talk about public health as everything. So when we address issues, whether it's dealing with Black men and cardiovascular disease, we have to address all the social determinants of health. That's mental, physical, social, economic, environmental, as well as spiritual. So environment plays a key role in the health outcome and the health of people all across this city, all across the world. Let me digress to Dr. Murray. Rock on, man. Let's roll.
Well, thank you. First, let me just start off as saying, I'm not from Chicago, born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. Where in Ohio are you from, Brianna?
Right outside of Columbus.
There you go. All right. Very good.
And we won't hold that against you all. I'm Chicago, born and raised. South Shore for life.
So let me first say at the beginning, because I don't want to forget this. This issue that we're going to be talking about, environmental racism, the movement of General Iron from Lincoln Park, we have a lot of rich white folks to the southeast side, where you have a lot of working class Black and Latinx folks. That's what we're going to talk about. But I did this on an earlier webinar we did. I want to do it here because I think it's important that we raise up our ancestors and our leaders. So I want to call out Hazel Johnson. She's considered one of the mothers of the environmental racist movement, the movement for environmental justice in the United States. And she's from New Orleans. She's a Southern woman. We lost her a few years ago in 2011. She died, but she was a major activist in Altgale Gardens, the public housing project there, built on top of toxic landfills for Black people. And she was part of that community, was a community activist for years, and really worked very hard establishing the fight back against that sort of toxic donut that she calls it, that Altgale Gardens sits in the middle of all these toxic landfills. So her contribution to environmental racism is profound. She was involved in a conference that got held in the 1990s, First Environmental Justice Summit of People of Color, which were all the people of color in the United States. I was privileged to work on that conference. And she's also part of the movement that forced President Clinton to sign an executive order against environmental racism. So she's one of our own from Chicago, and we really miss her leadership.
Cheryl Johnson, her daughter?
Absolutely, Cheryl. I was going to say the organization that she founded and led, her daughter now leads, and so that's been a major contribution. And they're aware of that community on the southeast side. The other thing I want to say, even though I'm not from Chicago, I want to do a shout out to all of our Latinx community. The steel mills in Chicago, and obviously into Indiana, the refineries and the steel mills in there, that is one of the first big communities of Mexican Americans in Chicago. It's not Little Village in Pilsen. It was the southeast side. People came here from Texas and other parts of the Southwest to work at the steel mills originally. the first Mexican American, the first Latinx Catholic church still open and operating was on the southeast side. So I want to do a shout out because newer arrivals often don't realize that on the southeast side we have a long-standing Mexican American community. So I want to say that in the very beginning. So let me just say that for me, in my area of training and specialization is occupational and environmental health. So to me, this is important and critical. And what we have here is a situation where people of color get put in toxic situations, and we get sick and die more quickly. It's that simple. Let me start with some basic stuff, since we're talking about steel mills, with the steel mills. So, if you came and got a job in the steel mill and you were Black, you didn't just work anywhere in the steel mill. There were certain areas back in the day, in the 1920s and 30s, there were certain areas of the steel mill where Black people worked. They were often the most uncomfortable areas. Same thing for Mexican Americans. The foundries were one places we worked. Another place was the ovens, the furnaces, the coal furnaces that you critically need to make the steel. And these places happen to have more carcinogens, chemicals that cause cancer, than other places in the steel mill. And so if you worked in that area, then you got those diseases. The same thing happened talking about Ohio, where it used to be way years ago. Akron, Ohio made the tires for our cars and trucks. And again, if you worked in the tire manufacturing area and you were Black or Puerto Rican, there's certain places you worked. And those places gave you bladder cancer, for example. So this segregation of work means that different people are exposed to different kind of chemicals. With environmental justice, we go out of the plant. We're not in the plant anymore. It's a question of where do you live? And of course, think about just history. So again, in the 1920s and 30s, most people with a regular job, we didn't have cars. Only rich people had cars. So people had to live either within walking distance of the plant that they worked at, or within if they were in part of the city that had public transportation, within a bus ride, from the plant where they worked. And so that's why on the southeast side, which is so heavy industrial, starting with the Southworks Steel, like on 79th in the Lakeshore, and going all the way through to Indiana, to Gary Works, to big mills that Southworks Steel alone used to employ 30,000 people. You have the heaviest industry in the country, steel making, oil refinery, etc. And people, Mexican Americans and Blacks, live within walking distance of those plants. So it's not an accident, for example, that in this part of the city, childhood asthma is through the roof, especially a few years ago when the mills were still functioning and working, because you're breathing in the same thing that's causing the lung cancer in those steel workers. Our children are breathing in the plant. It's not an accident that there are cancer clusters in the southeast part of the city and going into Indiana, because those chemicals that were making people sick are still there. They're buried in landfills, and they pollute the water and the Calumet River and all of that kind of stuff. So this problem of General Iron moving there is not a new problem for this area, and it puts on top of a bunch of poisons even more poisons. So let me sort of, just as an introduction, stop there and ask our 10th Ward sisters here to maybe describe what their organization has been doing about this. Either one of you, Yesenia or Brianna, either one, or Jonathan.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Murray. So to add to the historical context of what you were talking about on the southeast side, interestingly enough, after the Civil War, a lot of the industries also kind of set up shop there too, because geographically it complemented the industry, right? So they had access to the river, so their barges can come in with their product. And then they also use that river water too in the aquatic environment to use for cooling of these steel processing machines. And then in addition to that, because the southeast side was majority like wetlands, it was cheaper to purchase for these manufacturing businesses and for these industries, which is why it's so heavily concentrated, even, you know, up until today, with these toxic and these polluting industries, was because it was cheaper for these companies to be here. It was convenient for them. They were still within the Chicago market at the time, so they still had access to those markets, but they were far enough from the main city so that the pollution that was coming from these industries didn't necessarily affect the main part of Chicago, right? Because it was so far southeast. And in addition to that, like recognizing that now as an adult, I realized how kind of messed up that is. You know, like I understand that back then it was very critical for people to have economic stability, you know, and have these steel industry jobs because they brought in so much money for the community. But back then they did have to compromise their health for these jobs, for economic stability. And looking at the symbolism of what smoke was, you know, when people saw smoke in pictures from the Southeast side, that meant that there was opportunity, that meant that there is jobs. You know, it didn't necessarily raise those red flags in people's heads like, oh my God, this is toxic, we're breathing in these fumes. Back then it meant I can get a job here, there's work. And understanding that dynamic of how it started historically with appreciating the steel industry, United Neighbors of the 10th Ward actually had a pretty difficult time with the General Iron campaign, trying to kind of reverse that reality for the people and the constituents in the 10th Ward, and helping them understand that, yes, although back then, you know, this was economically stable for us to depend on these industry, these dirty jobs. Now, unfortunately, we have seen the health effects be exact, like, you know, we have seen worsening health effects that have been residual from these jobs. So just trying to kind of change that reality for our constituents has been a big thing through civic engagement and just educating and providing a basic foundation for people to understand that, you know, yes, you do deserve jobs to come into the ward, but they don't necessarily have to be these dirty industry jobs constantly. Like, we are worthy of better opportunities and further resources that aren't linked to dirty industry. So we do that through civic engagement, through making sure that we connect with constituents that are also disconnected because of language barriers. So making sure that the content we're putting out digitally and just physically can reach both audiences, right? Like our Spanish speaking constituents and those that are bilingual and speak English. So that was a really important thing to us, just to make sure that everybody's included in our community, because there is a big disconnect with the information that's coming from the city as far as how the health is impacted by the air quality. It's all in English, right? They don't have that available in Spanish for our constituents. So we had to step in and do that for them. Also kind of making them understand that their voices do matter. And although we've gone through this long era of political neglect and political abuse and abuse of our land because of like ill representation politically, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to voice your concerns and try and understand these processes as to how you can get involved and change them. So amplifying their voices and kind of reinstilling the value within themselves that their voice does matter, and that ultimately these civil servants, these politicians, they're here to work for us. They're here to provide what we're voting them in for. You know, so we're here to also hold them accountable to those standards, and teaching constituents in the 10th Ward how to do that by the different processes, by, you know, public comment, by calling in to talking to their aldermen, by educating them on who their representatives are based on the district and who represent them based on the state. So things of that nature. And then just making sure that we stay connected with them on any updates within the General Iron campaign was also a really big thing for us for UN10, you know, just so they can continue to be involved and feel like they're being represented justifiably, instead of just having a whole, you know, group of 20 or 30 people just kind of push one agenda per se and the community not agree. So it was really important for us to stay in touch with community members as to how they felt with, you know, General Iron being brought in right across the street from a high school, and seeing as to how we can use ourselves as vessels of change for our community to, you know, connect the dots and connect the bridges between the two disconnected things in the situation and the factors.
So Jonathan, what do you think the community thinks about where they're living? I mean, do you think people consider it a problem, or do you think attitudes have changed? Does the younger generation have a different attitude than than people my age?
Well, it's difficult for me because I don't live in the community today, but and it's also there's so much going on in the world, right? And it's very difficult to kind of keep tabs what's happening even in your own backyard. I think that my personally, my family, we have my grandmother who's just turned 90 not too long ago, April 1st, and she has Alzheimer's, and the family takes all their energy in like kind of taking care of her. And given the history of the various issues of health issues that occur in that population in that area, I have no doubt that others are kind of experiencing a lot of personal items that they have to address, and you're asking them for another 10% of their energy or 5% of their energy to kind of go towards something that's not happening right now, but that will happen sometime in the future. And it's hard to judge that, right? So I have a question for the two from UN10. How do you reach out to these individuals? What are the mediums in which you are engaging with the people? Is it through the churches? Is it through the schools? Is it through other longstanding organizations that are addressing this concern as well?
Yeah, I can take that one. There is a lot of cross networking that happens in this ward, and that's been something I think that's worked to strengthen this message in particular and some of the other campaigns in UN10 and some of the neighboring issues that the Stop General Iron campaign is anticipating going up against in the future. So for our networking, we do the best that we can for social media outreach. I've done my best in South Chicago, the neighborhood that I'm in, to advocate for this group, express the different benefits and just like the teachings that we have. I've become educated on things like the budget and different things that I really had no idea of, not even related to General Iron. Us as an independent political organization, the opportunities that provides for participation and education go hand in hand and has given me a lot of resources. It is, to speak more to the networking that has become a big part of this campaign, is equipping our peers with the same tools that we have, promoting individuals to do their own research, providing as many resources, articles, publications, statistics as we can, asking people if they're willing to sit in on city council meetings. I think there was one today, and things like that, to just hear about what the different types of ordinances are. So I think it was back in November or December, Lightfoot had an air ordinance that she was recommending, and then our alderwoman Garza put one out like I think 2 or 3 days before the council was going to meet and potentially vote on it. And that was a lot of emailing with, in the COVID times, it was a lot of emailing and calling our peers and, what do we do about this? How do we equip this community with the differences between Lightfoot's and Garza's in 3 business days? And it was a lot of creativity that came into that. And instances like that, or other instances throughout the General Iron campaign, really showed how important it was to have these like acquaintances and that sense of community and that net to fall back on, because that was how we really pulled together different creative strategies for getting information out there. I know a couple of other organizations that we work with, that UN10 and the Stop General Iron campaign work with, are youth focused, and they have an outlet to get into George Washington High School. And that's also how we started to let some of the youth know what was going on. Some of them already had an idea of what was going on. They read the news articles, they read the postings in the ward, but we were using those connections to chat more with youth, get them motivated. And one of the hunger strikers that was with us was also actually a teacher at George Washington. And so that was helpful in that we were able to get support from different teachers that were in that school, and then they would talk to their kids about, how do you feel about this? You see that these people are taking this drastic action. What does that look like for you? And so I think UN10, Yesenia, I don't know if we have permission to release it, but we do have an initiative for a youth-based program in UN10 coming out shortly. And that's one of the aims, is to work with these students in this ward. And, you know, it's a double-edged sword. Get excited about things going on in the ward and become equipped at some of the policies that are impacting their livelihood on an immediate basis, that are impacting their needs, their access to healthcare, things like that. So
tell us more about that hunger strike.
I'm sorry?
Tell us more about the hunger strike.
Sure.
Man.
How long?
Where to start?
Why'd you do it? Was it worth it?
Tough questions. We had started deliberating. I can give an intro to it, Yesenia, and then I want to give space for you too. We had started talking about it as a campaign, I want to say maybe December, middle of December, and it was just logistics. And it was, we know we're looking up against this second permit. They're already doing like construction at this time on their site, preparing for, you know, preemptively getting ready for that permit to be processed and approved. And all of our further steps at escalation hadn't gone through. So I know a couple of other organizations in the 10th Ward and the General Iron Campaign had protests and peaceful rallies and teach-ins, and they encouraged people to sit in on the public comment period. I forget how many, but there were, I want to say, at least 1,000 different public comment notes against General Iron, and like a handful that were for them that we speculated were likely payoffs for encouragement. So it was not an easy decision. We did sit on the logistics of it, the communication side of it, the publicity side of it, or the PR, I should say, side of it for, you know, at least 2 months. And then all the background work that the media didn't necessarily cover, that was, who are our medics? What are our emergency plans? What are our strategies? What is our personal boundaries? What is our boundary? What do our boundaries look like as a group? And those were long discussions that we had for 2 months. So we started the hunger strike, I believe it was on February 1st. I think that was a Thursday we announced it. And it was not a cold water only hunger strike, because we are in a global pandemic. We weighed the efficacy of a hunger strike with our safety, and we determined that liquids only. We had broths, really, that was it, broths and fruit drinks like nectars, and you know, to supplement salts and things. And we went for 30 days. And it was difficult. It was hard to stay with it. I didn't know this, but traditionally hunger strikes, you'd be like staying together, seeing each other every day, going to a park, like having community members rally around you in public places, and it was difficult with COVID. We got support. I'm not saying that wasn't there, but it was an added strain. And we all had to keep doing the things we were already doing. You know, we were taking interviews, talking, demanding that the mayor speak with us, trying to get a meeting with her. And I had to go to work, and Yesenia had to go to school, and Oscar had to organize, and Chuck had to teach. And we continued doing the best we could. So after 30 days, and we made a determination that our safety, you know, there were other forms of escalation that could have been effective at that point, and they needed all hands on deck. So we slowly started reintegrating food after 30 days.
Yeah, if I can support what Brianna just mentioned, as far as like just the decision to end the hunger strike on March 5th, it wasn't necessarily just to start incorporating other actions. It was because that we met with the mayor's chief of staff and then one other person, and we laid out our demands plain and simple, you know, and they asked us they didn't even ask us, actually. They were kind of beating around the bush. And I was so frustrated in that meeting, to the point where I'm just like, we're not going to eat unless you all deny the permit, period. And they're like, okay, well, this is what we wanted to know, to let the mayor know. And I was like, okay, great, make sure you tell her. And she was informed that same day. And after being informed, we never heard from the mayor directly, aside from that that statement that she made, basically gaslighting us and saying that she was committed to the process, when our entire campaign was highlighting the fact that the process was the problem. And to kind of like add to what Brianna was saying as far as the hunger strike in general, it was definitely a last resort and something I would never recommend anybody do, because it was an incredibly traumatic experience for me in particular. It was really hard to give up solid foods in the middle of a pandemic. It was really hard to not have the energy to go to school or even think or compartmentalize my energy and kind of stretch it out. When I was running on a fourth of the energy that I originally had, you definitely start to feel yourself deteriorate and wither as the days go by. You kind of question how you're going to function the following day. It's scary. You're alone because of the pandemic a lot of the time. So digitally, we were able to check in with each other via text, which was very helpful. It was great seeing the support from everybody in the city and across the nation, and being featured in international newspapers like The Guardian, which was huge, you know. So to what, you know, Mr. Murray mentioned, like, was it worth it? Yes and no. To me, I'm going to say yes, because it did heighten the voice of the community on the Southeast side and those other environmental justice communities that need to be highlighted, so people understand what's going on and how serious of an issue this actually is, and the fact that there was a crisis before this pandemic even hit, right, which is the air quality in Chicago, and the air pollution crisis that we've been dealing with for years. So that was worth it for me. It was worth it seeing the students feel supported and feeling like they have you know, adult representatives that will fight for them and will literally fight to the death for the betterment of their future. So that was very worth it for me. But it was extremely traumatic being in a situation where you're starving yourself, you're withering, you're still trying to be the best civilian you can by following your responsibilities as a daughter, as a sister, taking care of yourself, going to school, and still trying to put your best foot forward while defending your community with the last bit of energy that you have. And your mayor is just like, well, you're not important enough for me to actually take the time to see why you're so upset about this issue and why this is so detrimental to community like yours and the rest that have been affected. You know, we're still going to stick to this process that has been killing people for, you know, the past 100 years, and, you know, we'll figure it out from there. So we decided to end the hunger strike because if it was up to the mayor, we would have died. Plain and simple. We would have died before the mayor would have acted on anything.
So I think that as we think about tactics, I want to draw a connection between what we're talking about now. So here we have this, just so people know, this is a plant that breaks down plastics and metals and chops it up, and, you know, for recycling, and it's been historically located on the in Lincoln Park, and now it's moving to the southeast side so that they can build, what do they call it, Lincoln Yards or something? Is that what they call it? Yeah, right, so they can build this expensive. But I want to connect the issues that are really here. So, you know, yesterday we had a verdict. An unusual verdict because they actually found this former policeman guilty. But the point I want to make is that in order to change the conversation, and so if you don't want George Floyd's to continue as they have for the past 500 years, right, then you have to go in and you have to challenge the underlying premise. And the underlying premise of the police is they're there to kill us. I mean, you know, they're there to control us and kill us when necessary. So if you want to take the position, no, we in Minneapolis, we run this city. The people ought to run the city, and the people need to control the police. And so that's certainly the position that we have in Chicago with CPAC and others saying, you know, we want to have control of the police. They should not be allowed to run amok and kill our children and our people. That's the same thing we're saying here on the southeast side. Just because you force us to work in bad conditions, we should have something to say about what's going on, about what kind of industry is in our community, and what are we doing to the water and air. And so for the younger generation, I'm so impressed with them, because if we don't change places like General Iron, then we're going to lose to climate change. Jobs won't matter. You know,
Right.
we have significant climate change. It's going to make it worse. So the same kind of industrial process that General Iron is doing and is proposing for the South Side, in other parts of the world, those processes are completely enclosed and there's no pollution of water or air. Okay. But obviously it costs more to do that. So we have to make a decision just as human beings. Do we want to control the schools or not? Do we want to control our health system or not? Do we want to control what industry is in our community or not? And I argue that we need to do that. So this is part of a long fight about making sure that human beings that live and work in our neighborhoods should be able to control what goes on in those neighborhoods.
So what are some strategies to do that? Like, you know, let's drop some knowledge on people. Like, is it partnering with organizations that don't look like you and getting them on the same platform, along with using the data that we learned from Lincoln Park? You know,
of course. So for example, in the 10th Ward, we have the People's Recovery Organization, Cheryl's organization, Cheryl Johnson's organization, predominantly African American. You know, they've been out there on those same picket lines with the 10th Ward group. So on the southeast side, even though the press doesn't like to make this clear, you really have a Black, Latinx, and white, but predominantly Black and Latinx coalition. But it goes even deeper than that. It's not just a question of who you have allies with. That becomes important, or even how you organize. Obviously, that's important. But how you raise the question so you can convince people to work. So in this country, chemicals have more rights than George Floyd. Okay, so the way we do our regulate, that's what the mayor is about to do. Is this company allowed? They have to have a permit from the state of Illinois and from the city to be able to run this plant. And so how we've done it historically in the United States is we assume that a chemical is safe and nice until it kills millions of people. That's really what we do. So really you find that the chemical has more rights than George Floyd or a brother on the street or whatever. And so we have to challenge that. We have to say, no, chemicals are chemicals. They're not human beings. They should not supersede the rights and health of human beings. So that's the first thing, to change the conversation. The purpose of school is to really educate people, not to keep kids trapped in a building, you know, but to actually educate them. If we want to have safety in our neighborhoods, we have to have more than just a cop with a gun, because they don't even know what they're shooting at. We have to have, you know, programs and resources and jobs and treat people with dignity. So to answer your question, the first step is to be clear what the real issue is. So with General Iron, the real issue is that plant should not exist anywhere where they're human beings run the way it's historically been run. They should be forced to upgrade what they're doing so that they don't damage the environment and therefore human beings. Secondly, I think that all of the organizations, so we have organizations that are focused on this issue. We have to understand where our issues coincide. In Pilsen, they were fighting an incinerator not too long ago, and they blew up some old plant and messed up the whole neighborhood. So we have to understand in different communities around the Chicagoland area, you have groups of people with the same kinds of problems and issues. And when we come together and say, we need to change this permitting process for the city, you know, because General Iron has not violated the law at the moment. That's because the law is not right. Okay. Just like that officer shooting or killing George Floyd, that happens every day because we haven't changed the underlying laws and said, this is not what you're supposed to do. So to me, that's even more important than making allies. Making allies is important, but if you're allied and you don't ask the right demand, then you end up behind.
So what I'm saying though is that, so we're talking about, let's just talk about the steel mill. You know, that's part of South Shore. You know, I grew up in South Shore. There wasn't a big call to arms about the environmental issues in South Shore from the steel mill. But from the older I get, the more I learn stuff. So I'm just gonna throw this on families. As a father, you know, being married with children, nobody wants their children growing up in neighborhoods that are affected with, you know, crime and everything else, but let alone the air we breathe. So maybe it's even part of what you're saying. Maybe it's even strategically, you know, wording what the literature you give, like change how you want to fight. Like I know black women will be up. Black women will definitely help you all make some change in black organizations. It's just, it's like if we don't know, we can't fight with you. And I agree with Dr. Murray about strategically changing how we fight. But I do think it's something that should be commonly known to people on the Southeast side. You know, because I'm getting upset now. I'm thinking like, shit, is that one of the reasons my little baby caught asthma? Because of the steel mill and the after effects? And I know they're trying to, you know, build condos over there now and change that into New Chicago.
Right.
So what do we need to do? Do we need to get tougher? Do we need to get some of these, you know, young men to go stand on their property and not let them, you know, start building? Like, what is it? How drastic should it be, and how serious is it? Because at some point, and I'm not knocking marching and protesting, at some point we got to put our foot down and we got to make a move, and we got to scare the powers that be, man. And that's the only way we're gonna get change, like in other countries. And I'm not saying scare them necessarily physical violence, but scare our presence being there, going to these politicians and putting them on blast and getting rid of them. But let me talk to the young people. What do you all think?
Mr. Murray, you know what? Those are, Mr. Murray and Dr. Murray, those are all really great points. And I think to characterize the organizing of, go to in a meeting, please, to characterize the organizing of like how these things have to go is like you have to instill that dignity in the constituents before you even think about making allies with any other neighborhoods. And it's with that, teaching the health aspect of how these things affect our cognitive and our mental health. You know, because you can link air pollution to cognitive decline like this if you go through the numbers. You can link air pollution to mental health decline like this if you look at the numbers. And with that, you can see how it plays out into our societies and our communities with the increase in violence, with the increase in impulsive decisions, with the increase in disorders in children with learning, you know, with learning issues that they'll have in school. You can link all of that to air pollution and to decline of resources to enable them to develop as children, as students. You know, so just painting that picture for constituents and making them understand like, hey, like, although this has been our history in the past on the Southeast side where we're constantly dependent on dirty industry and pollution, this doesn't have to continue to be our future. There are other outlets that we deserve to have. And at the end of the day, we're all taxpayers. It doesn't matter what your status is in this country, every single person pays tax. It's not like one of us can go to the corner store and get a bottle of water and, you know, a pickle or something and be like, no, I'm going to hold off on the tax today. Thank you. So thinking about that, our tax dollars, all of our tax dollars are going into the money that's up north, that's developing what's going on up north. So why isn't that happening on the Southeast side? That's the question. Why are our tax dollars going up north and we keep getting dirty industry? After this company was deemed dangerous to a community up north, it's already affluent, that's white. Why do we deserve this? So starting those conversations and making people understand that we deserve a lot more than what we're getting and we're actually paying for it and we're not seeing that investment in return. So starting with that, and then amplifying their voices, empowering them to actually get involved and establishing that sense of community that the South Side is known for, you know, and talking to your neighbors about it and not being afraid to go outside and talk to your neighbors and your community members and having these conversations, I think is a really good start. And also, Dr. Murray, like you were saying, hold our ground. Like, this is our neighborhood. We're not going to wait for somebody to come in a white horse from Evanston, you know what I mean, or from Lincoln Park to come and tell us how to organize. Like, we got what we need in these neighborhoods. You guys can join in if you want to help, but these are our narratives and we're not going to let anybody else speak for us. And we're also going to stand our ground and demand what we've been paying for and what we deserve, you know, just to live an equitable life. So I agree. It's holding your ground. It's building a foundation with education and painting a reality for people to understand that, like, this isn't what we deserve. And it's only happened because there hasn't been accountability thus far with the political agencies that are responsible in Chicago.
So let me throw this out there.
You're leaping at the bit, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was listening to the question and listening to Yesenia, and Dr. Murray, Mr. Murray, you mentioned that your daughter has asthma. I have asthma, and I was born in South Shore. I was 87th and Manistee, and I'm thinking of other family members that have cancer. An uncle with cancer passed away. My grandfather worked in the steel mills, got asthma, cancer, passed away from it. Two aunts breast cancer, an aunt breast cancer and a grandmother with breast cancer. So it's just something that those families in that area are living with on a day-to-day basis, and it's a lot to handle, and then not to mention the fact that we're in a pandemic, to then say, hey, don't forget about what's happening in your backyard, or keep an eye on what's going on in your backyard, and then linking everything, right? Because everything's linked, and people are quick to forget or just have other things on their mind. And I think it's having that time and being in front of them. Right now it's difficult because of COVID, but finding those other avenues in which you can continue to say, there are things happening that will continue to affect your family in this area for generations to come. That's the difficult one.
So let me throw this out here, the devil's advocate side. I should say devil's advocate because unfortunately people feel like this. With the lack of economy on the south side, especially the southeast side, and the need for having big box business, not necessarily industrial, what do we say, or how do we address those individuals that are looking for work, that don't really care, like just point blank, they say, I need a job, I have to feed my family and my little ones, and eventually I can move to a safer neighborhood, and I'm willing to risk, I'm willing to risk my health for the betterment of my family. And often people of color, especially Black folks and brown folks, have been put in situations where we put our health, whether it's mental or physical health, on the line to feed our family. So what do we do about that? Do we just say, General Mill, we don't want you there, or is there a replacement? Like, in terms of your organizations, do you all try to bring in other businesses to offset that potential income that people might be losing in terms of jobs?
I can speak a little bit to this one. I don't want to take up too much space for it, but I do know that a couple of the women that have been leading this organization, the Coalition Ban Pet Coke, Southeast Environmental Task Force, them and their attorneys, and others on this call, but just for me, have those suggestions in place. They can pull them out of their back pocket and list a series of green jobs that would be equitable in this community in terms of labor development, economic development. I do know also, just for our demands with the hunger strike, we did have a series of citywide demands that would generate potentially jobs. So we were like, an electric bus fleet. Well, you need engineers for that. You need new drivers. You need training programs that now gives people skills, that are going to directly impact that community. Not only is it giving you a job, but it's increasing your air quality, or, at least mitigating the past harm potentially. So a series of our demands did also take into consideration a long-term effect. And I do understand that, especially in a pandemic, people are desperate for employment, and I can understand and make space for that, like, momentary desperation with the ideal of, then I can move. And I guess I would hope that one day this community gets to the point where the resolution isn't, let me move, let me, it's let me stay here because I feel safe in this community, because I know my genetics aren't going to be altered, and I'm not passing this on to my, to my offspring. The way that the different pollutions, particulate matters, are interacting with my genetics, I'm not passing that on to my offspring. We can safely stay here sustainably with a green job, with, diverse economies. And I don't, like, the end game isn't, let me work for 10 years heavy and then I'll move somewhere else where it's safer. It's let me, stay here and really plant roots and feel proud of this community. But again, I'm sure that others on this call might be more familiar with what a green job specifically looks like. I just know from the hunger strike, some of our demands did take that into consideration.
So this is something that industry often brings up, as though it's a choice between either you starve to death or you work in our dirty shop. Now, let's be realistic. People have to pay rent and feed their kids. And this is not going to happen overnight. However, we do know that I think the key thing people have to understand is there is no safe place. So if you ask me what was the most dangerous thing in the city of Chicago that's harming our children, I would say it's lead in the water. People know about Flint. Chicago has the worst lead in the city water in the country and have had for years. Okay, it's not as obvious as Flint, because Flint was a special circumstance. They did something even worse than what we do. But because the lead is there and it doesn't make kids throw up or anything, people think it's not harming them, but it is harming them. It's harming adults too, but it's especially harming the children. So if we think that because you live in Lincoln Park or Wilmette or Skokie, that you escape these environmental poisons, you're mistaken. You may not have air that smells horrible like we do on the southeast side, but you still have these toxins around, and we still are affecting the climate in dangerous ways. So it really does mean making a decision on who makes how much money off of what. So we can insist on green jobs. We can insist that people be paid what they're worth on any job, but especially on the green jobs. And it means, again, changing up the rules. If we play by the man's rules, we're going to get screwed. It's that simple. We can fight and say, you can't shoot us in the street, but we still, if we don't change the rules, then our children and our grandchildren will be harmed. So that's my first answer to that. And I think people have to organize on their jobs and have unions, and they have to set up environmental regulations that restrict what companies can do, what they can put in the air. And we'd have to enforce those regulations and laws, because we do have some regulations and laws, but often the companies ignore them and we don't prosecute them. And we can already see the climate change that's going on in our country. They may not label it that, but it's already going on. And we think about all of those plants from when you were a child, Marcus. Those jobs are gone now. And they're not gone because people made the plants become clean. So like I said, if we don't change the underlying rules, they move the jobs where they want to. And so Southworks Steel used to employ 30,000, no more today. So it means understanding what's really happening to people and understanding that we have to move in to change the rules.
Also, Dr. Murray, if I can add to what you and Brianna just mentioned, I think a really critical element is also pushing the creative limits of the political representation of like alderpersons and city council, because we see this happening on the southeast side often, just because we've been so dependent on polluting industry, where there's been a lack of creativity to bring anything else to our side of town. Like, why aren't we developing mechanical engineers, electrical engineers? Why don't we have, a facility studying our natural habitats so we can continue to preserve that? Why don't we have labs to curate opportunity for youth to, develop into medical professionals or researchers or scientists? It doesn't take just organizers to stop an industry like this. It takes a lot of different and a multitude of skill sets to really work as a community in order to create the solutions, with new science for old problems. So I think also a really big aspect of creating change for these kinds of situations is getting people in a seat of political representation, like an alderperson, that's going to have more of a creative approach to how to resolve these situations and how to be inclusive of the community as well, instead of just, pushing their own political agenda just to fill their pockets because this, this dirty industry is giving them campaign money, which is what we've seen in the city of Chicago, is them just, making deals with these kind of companies and these lobbyists just to fill their own pockets and get reelected, and selling out their communities for $9,000 plus. So,
and that's what they do. We know why they don't have it. It's racism. They don't care about us. People fear things like violence and money and a loud voice, so they hate bad press. So I'm never going to advocate for a violent reaction. I'm just not going to do that, especially publicly. So what we have to do is think of creative ways to get allies. Maybe this incorporating some bigger names than politicians, some celebrities, some entertainers, some athletes to help be advocates and put that story out. Until we get the story out, and let people know the harm and the damage that it's doing, even on a fifth grade reading level, all the way up to a scientific way. We just need allies, and we have to try something new. If it's we just have to try something new and try different ways, because at some point, talk becomes cheap and nobody's gonna listen to you. You're just like a squeaky wheel. So we're gonna have to do more than that and get people involved. What do you all think?
Well, I agree with you. As we move to close, I want to make sure our guests get the last word here. But I will say this: I think Jonathan mentioned it earlier. We have to connect the dots on all of these issues. People have to understand that these issues are connected, and the problems that we're having in the Chicago public schools are caused by the same people who are moving plants, the same people who are having people work for less than $15 an hour. And so we have to learn how to connect up these issues. Every child in Chicago that's drinking water out of our water system is in danger of being lead burdened. And that's not, I mean, even though the Tribune's run articles on it, people get psyched out of thinking they can't do anything. When we understand that what happened to George Floyd and what happened to Tamir Rice and what happened with voting, having a grandchild stand in line outside of Atlanta for 8 hours to vote. Okay, that's the same problem that we're having up here. I do think with the politicians, the politicians work for us. So I'm not interested in, I don't care if they don't have to be creative. They just have to do what people want them to do. And that's difficult to do. So I agree, Marcus. It means bringing in big names, but it also means for people taking the time to learn about all these issues. You can't work on every single issue. I'm not saying that, but you can be aware of them.
And I definitely understand. I'm just saying making people aware in a cultural way that they will understand. So the language for my Latino brothers and sisters might be different from the Black community. Making sure we have appropriate language. And then at some point, we just got to get gangster with it, man. We got to call these politicians out. We got to have 200 people in front of these aldermen's office talking shit to them. That'll get them to listen. We got to take 3 if people know, people will get involved. But if people don't know, it's just like, it's like let me give you a hardcore example. I remember the steel mill. I remember we used to hear it all throughout the neighborhood. And people would say, such and such is coming home. Let's make sure we go home and do our chores or whatever. So that lingering effect from that, is causing damage to us and to this community. And like Doc said, we're going back up to the north side. So it's just a matter of building stronger allies. And I'm going to say this, and not being soft, man. We got to toughen up. As activists, we're going to have to change some of how we strategically fight, man. I just want to throw that out there because, I don't know, man. As an old school general, I just want us to just get a little bit more creative and a little bit more aggressive with these white folks. And it's not just white folks. It's Latinos and Black, too, that play ball with them. But anytime y'all want to do stuff, let me know. I like being a troublemaker.
So as we come into our closing minutes, let me ask Brianna and then Yesenia and Jonathan if they have any final thoughts or advice on what we need to do next, not only about General Iron, but things in general. So Brianna, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. Again, thank you just for sharing this platform. I'm honored to have gotten the request to provide input to share what I experienced specifically on the hunger strike and be a springboard for what the 10th Ward has, from what I've learned from the 10th Ward in my time here, from these people that have been carrying this torch for decades. Yeah, I can agree with Murray that there's a lot of different avenues for what we're looking at. It's not only accountability for the processes that have failed us, but also justice and rematriating this land with resolutions. I've just recently heard that, I guess, I'm not entirely sure. I think CDPH still does like medical health, home health visits. So it's a little devastating, I think, to be seen as one of the largest cities in the US and have a Department of Public Health that could be using its resources and allocating its funds in a more efficient manner for everyone. And seeing how the 10th Ward has gotten the short end of that stick for a long time has been really difficult. So I'm grateful to those who heard this message. Like Yesenia said, we got a lot of great publication once the hunger strike started to pick up momentum, and I wish it didn't come to that point, but if it was going to, I am glad that it became an echo chamber where our values were being reflected across the city. There was a group in Georgia that picked this up. I think there was a group in Seattle that provided a statement of support. Instances like that make it feel closer to worth it for me. You know, I do think that committing to what we did was worth it. And I guess I would just continue to encourage people to sign up to do that heavy work with us. You know, a striking point for me also was that the communities that are impacted by this shouldn't be the ones that also have to do the labor to educate others. Like, just because a person is trans doesn't mean that they're an educator and they're instantly in a position to constantly educate other people on what it's like to be trans. Other people should take on that burden. And I think that's part of what we started to see and what we're continuing to see now with the issues in the 10th Ward is that the people carrying this burden obviously should be centered and their voices should be uplifted. And others who are not carrying those burdens need to be doing as much as they can to uplift that story, share it, spread it, get education out there. So I've been encouraged to see that that's taken place. I feel honored to have been able to take part in that through the organizing that I participated in. And also instances like this where we're given a platform to share what reinventing a cleaner community looks like, where we're starting where we're at. And we have this end goal of a safe community where our air is as prioritized to be clean as other communities, as we're seeing that the city can allocate other wards to protect from. So I think that's my check. Thank you.
Thank you. And Yesenia, I want you, and then we're going to go to Jonathan and have him maybe talk about Cook County a little bit. So Yesenia, what do you think is next on the plate for the 10th Ward? And do you have any advice for other parts of the city?
It's a good, meaty question. My advice for other parts of the city would be to have the conversations that people don't want to have, embrace those uncomfortable situations where you're talking about things like environmental racism, social injustice, anti-Blackness, and how that manifests in our communities, but not just necessarily talk about it. Like Mr. Murray said, like actually do something about it if you're so outraged, you know, like don't just be on Twitter tweeting hashtags about people that have been shot by the police, but actually get involved with different organizations that are doing work to defund the police, you know, so, and educate yourself on why that's happening and why those funds can be reallocated to different resources, you know, to prevent these things hopefully from happening down the line. So just continuing the educational aspect of it, holding yourself accountable as a working member in these communities, and holding yourself accountable as someone with the capacity as a vessel of change for your communities, and just working at the capacity that you have, you know, to instill change that you actually want to see. And also, like I said, like embracing what's uncomfortable, you know, because some of these proposals can seem very far-fetched to communities that have been so accustomed to just being like neglected and abused and just dumped on, you know, so just embracing that uncomfortableness and letting your curiosity lead you, and just kind of being fluid with the process, because progress from dismantling essentially these racist and, you know, systemic oppressive processes is not going to be linear, you know, so it's not going to be 1, 2, 3 and then we finally get 4. Like it's going to be messy, it's going to be difficult, but if everybody plays their part, you know, little by little we can progress as communities. And also being patient within our own vulnerable communities and communities that have been traumatized. Like I think there has to be a practice of patience within ourselves, because we are learning all of this. You know, because we weren't taught, because we are the ones that are being abused and traumatized. It is very difficult to maneuver that kind of atmosphere, just because a lot of this is triggering for a lot of us to continually speak on and share our narratives that have been very oppressive, but just work as a community, embrace each other, be patient, continue the education portion of it, and don't be afraid of just kind of following a curiosity that can potentially lead you to an end product of establishing something new and something beneficial for your community. So I think that would be my advice for communities in Chicago, to work in unison along with other communities, in the nation, that just kind of need to, like Mr. Murray said, put your foot down, get gangsta. Like Congressman John Lewis said, you got to get in some good trouble sometimes to combat the bad trouble. And I firmly stand by that. And Brianna can definitely tell you that I'm not afraid to curse out and hold these alderpersons accountable, because at the end of the day, they're here to serve us, period. And that's it. That's final. And if you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. That's simple. So that would be my advice.
Well, thank you. Jonathan, you're a young public health professional. That's who we try to target on this podcast. So what should young public health professionals be doing about these kind of problems?
Are you setting me up to talk about Cook County?
Yeah, sure. You can talk about them.
Well, as a public health professional, it's difficult to know where can you do your part, right? And a lot of times you graduate and you find a position you need to start your career. It may not always be in public health. Like currently, my current role, I'm more of an administrator in a university. But fortunately, I've been part of the Collaborative for Health Equity Cook County. It's something that's been around for how many years now, Dr. Murray? Maybe 10
or 11 years.
Yeah. And it's grown, it's changed over time, but it is a place where we as a group can align ourselves with various issues that are occurring in the Cook County or Cook County area. And it is something that I'm very passionate about. I've been on the steering committee along with Dr. Murray and Jim Boyd and Wesley Eplin. So there's others that are very active. And I ask that, I'll spread the word and continue to have more of an active voice so that we can tap into that network, right? We talked about building the network and building our voice. Kind of what Lucinda was saying. I was thinking, yeah, vote them out, but run for office yourself. I think we have to encourage younger folks to run, and others that are in line with our thoughts, or at least considering the impact of the environment and things that are long term that will impact our future generations. And if our current elected officials are not doing that, vote them out, but replace them with people that you think are going to make a difference.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to my host to close out, let me just remind people we're here every third Wednesday of the month. And next month in May, we'll be joined by Doctors Rogers and Fagan. And we're going to be talking about blowing up the medical system of this country and putting it back together in a way that everybody can stay healthy. So let me invite you to join us next month. And Mr. Murray, now that you've called on revolution, do you have any words to close us out?
Yes, first I want to thank the young people, for coming on here and speaking your truth. It's much needed. And make sure, and I want to give you all kudos too, because you all are doing things, a lot of people aren't aware. And even the details of like how to get in touch with the man, let's share that with other people and with other communities, because people they take that for granted. And the last thing I'm going to say is this. To all these young people, the young wannabe tough guys and gangsters, I don't care if you're Latino, Asian, I don't care if you're Black, Italian. The purpose of being tough guys and gangsters back in the day was to protect the neighborhood. Start getting involved in these politics. You ain't that tough if you're going to keep letting your daughters and sons drink lead water. You ain't a tough guy if you're going to let these politicians just dictate how our grandmothers, mothers, aunts, fathers, and cousins should live. If you really want to be a gangster and be a tough guy, get involved, whether it's a stop sign, whether it's violence, whether it's water, whether it's public health issues, be that type of tough guy. And again, tune in next week. And like always, man, thanks for tuning in. And thank you, Dre. Without you, it wouldn't happen, brother. Peace.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. you.